Tansi friends, I am Heather Morgeau, and I'm reading an article that I wrote about the theory that the vandalism and burning of churches that is being blamed on Indigenous people is in fact the churches themselves doing this. And I'd like to give you my reasons that I believe this. 1. The Catholic Church has been experiencing a catastrophic decline in attendance over the past decade. Churches have been closing all over Turtle Island because they have not been receiving enough funds to support their business. Think of Starbucks closing their locations. Number 2, the Catholic Church and the Queen of England own more land than any other individual or corporation in so-called Canada. When they close the churches, they want to keep the land and repurpose it to turn a profit. However, they experience backlash from the community when they demolish their own churches to set up paid parking or rental apartments. Burning the churches relieves them from this backlash. It ensures they get payouts for rebuilding and allows the land to be repurposed. Number 3, Indigenous people are easy to blame. Right now we're facing an unprecedented crisis of discovering thousands of bodies of Indigenous children at residential schools that were run by Catholic churches primarily. For the Catholic Church, Indigenous people have been regarded as subhuman since they arrived on the shores of Turtle Island, and it's easy to blame us because they have no respect for us. By burning down their own churches, it's a great way to save face for the repurposing and to raise money. Think of the billions raised when the church is burnt down in Paris. Number 4, destroy the evidence. Not only is the Catholic Church known for hiding and housing child rapists, killing and selling the babies of unwed mothers, as well as the genocide towards Indigenous people throughout the world, they have likely made financial donations to organizations which are continuing neo-colonialism by supporting politicians who uphold their agenda of forced birth, pro-life, and removing a person's right over their own uterus and fertility. Anti-LGBTQAI2S actions, such as conversion therapy, would also be among their donors. All of these actions are evidence of human rights violations which could go to court, and the churches could be fined millions or even billions on a class action lawsuit. Burning the evidence before they are subpoenaed by the courts ensures there's no concrete evidence of their crimes. Number 5, it furthers their propaganda of Christian persecution. So in cults, the idea of being oppressed creates a trauma bond between the members, and they feel like they're not safe outside of the organization. The only safety that they have is together. And this means that anyone who questions the ethics, behaviors, and history of the organization is used as an example of being persecuted. The very concept that they should be held accountable for their ethics, behavior, and history is absolutely out of the question and reframed as oppression. Burning churches is a traumatic event, even for their membership. So it feels like they're losing a home, but unlike you losing a home, nothing's actually been lost in relation to their personal safety, community, or belongings. Those things are still all available. The trauma bond over the loss that they experience from the loss of their undisturbed homes, and then turns into grief against the outside world that they're being persecuted. All the while, the arson was set by the church leaders themselves. And I suspect there will be a measurable pattern which emerges. All the fires start in the basement. Who has access to a church basement after hours? Typically, these fires are being set when nobody's there, so nobody gets hurt. B, the fires start on Fridays or Saturdays in hopes of garnering the most support from shaken churchgoers on Sundays, alternately Tuesdays for Wednesday Mass. Letter C is None of the vandalized churches hire private security, or if they do, shortly after they stop hiring them, the fires occur. And this will make it seem like a pattern of being targeted. D, in the press, they will attempt to blame Indigenous people and dehumanize us using slurs. And politically correct slurs, like people who are emotionally unstable, right? They're going to say things like that. Or some other narrative which gaslights the horrors of residential schools and the many other crimes that the church has committed. This is typical narcissist behavior of transforming the abuser into the victim. So, if I were magically elected to be the Queen of Canada and we get out from under this British colonial oppression, I would immediately require the Royal Canadian Mounted Police to seize all documents from all Catholic churches and schools and storage facilities owned by them. I would restrict the travel of priests, nuns, bishops, and cardinals until the evidence has been reviewed. They wouldn't be in jail, they'd just be restricted from leaving the country until they've stood trial. After the investigation, if the church is found to be not involved with residential schools, forced sterilization, child rape, infanticide, or selling babies of unwed mothers, money laundering, financial support of racists and anti-LGBTQIA2S, or forced birth extremists, or any other human rights crime, they can have their church back. No problem. If they are found to be involved in any of those, reparations against named victims will be paid. And I'll add the caveat that this includes the victims that they've given hush money to. There have been thousands of people who have come forward and said they have been sexually abused by members of the church. They were given hush money and forced to sign a non-disclosure agreement, and that is unethical. Second is reparations against organizations to support victims will be paid. For example, counseling agencies which support survivors of sexual violence, or LGBTQAI2S youth supports and housing, those organizations will be given reparations because the harm of the Catholic Church has directly resulted in those organizations being required in our society to support many people. The third is I would seize the land of the church and give it back to the Indigenous people who live in the community to do with as they see fit. So if the church is on reserve land, the First Nation gets the church. If the church is on a Métis settlement, the Métis settlement gets the church. If the church is in a city, then the urban Indigenous population that wants to be involved with the repurposing of that space would get involved, and they would be working together to self-govern and decide what that space would be used for. Fourth, criminal charges will be pressed against any priest, nun, cardinal, or bishop who has worked with that church during or after crimes were committed. I believe that even if they were not employed by that church during the time when the harms were committed, the people who come into that church are complicit in protecting the evidence that proves those crimes. If they were truly people of God and responsible for upholding justice, they would have turned over those documents as soon as they became available, or as soon as they were discovered. Even if they weren't discovered, there is knowledge within the organization of past history. As well, regardless of criminal charges across so-called Canada, I would enact a defunding of all Catholic schools. 0 tax dollars from citizens will go to any church-run education system. All the Catholic school buildings will be repurposed into private schools, or they can become, they will be repurposed as public schools, or the Catholic Church, the Catholic school can become a private school, like every other religious organization that runs a school. I would defund all Christian services. So this is housing supports, addiction treatment, shelters, any social support which is run by a faith-based organization would become secular or multi-faith. So the multi-faith food bank here in Calgary, no problem. The housing which requires, the emergency housing which requires people to denounce their culture and accept Jehovah as their leader, that organization would be shut down, and that housing would be made social housing, which is secular. And this is because I do not believe housing, food, counseling should be dependent on the forced or coerced acceptance of religious dogma. That is religious abuse. It is a crime. And people are going to say, but Heather, religion helps so many people. Just because it's hurt a few folks doesn't mean all churches should be held accountable. If a church is not actively involved in human rights crimes, past or present, they should be more than happy to bring to justice any churches that are involved with criminal behavior like that. Just because those few bad apples cause more death and destruction and harm than can ever be measured, as followers of Jesus, y'all should be more than willing to support truth, justice, and accountability for those few bad apples. So yeah, thanks for watching. This is exactly what I would do if I were in a position of political authority within Canada. I'm an Indigenous woman, Two-Spirit, so no, I am not in a position of political authority within Canada, but this is exactly what I would do if I were. Thanks for watching, thanks for sharing. Take care of each other, be safe, and seek out support if you are struggling with anger, trauma, PTSD, anything like that. If you need to reach out to me, I will be here as best I can. We're all struggling right now. The entire Indigenous community, much of Canada is reeling from this crisis. It is the most horrific thing to be uncovered. And I do not believe that protecting churches is helping anyone heal from this crisis. So thank you for listening. Have a great day. Take care of each other.